and to Fraudible, the video podcast that brings together academics and practitioners to discuss all things fraud. In this episode, we're going to be talking about romance fraud, and who else would I be joined by other than practitioner Anna Rowe and academic Dr. Elisabeth Carter. Thank you, ladies, and for joining me and today. Anna, would you mind giving us a brief introduction to yourself, please?
Sure. So I got into romance fraud through my own experience. It wasn't a financial fraud experience, but a lawyer here in the UK who was leading a double life with a complete fake online identity. Difference was with him that he came offline to meet his victims, and I'd never been through a relationship like that before, and came out of it fairly scarred, and set up a website, Catch the Catfish, which I founded. And over the last 6 years, that developed across social media. And I got to the point where I'm helping 75 to 100 victims a week across the globe. And I have very much empathy and understanding about the financial romance fraud, because the vehicle that I was put on, the journey that I went through of manipulation, is parallel to that the fraudsters use to make victims compliant and seemingly complicit in what happens. And then after my experience was being investigated by the police, so I wasn't allowed to be noisy about things. But when that ended, I started being noisy again. And I was asked to do some webinars, and that's where I met Cecilia Philhoy. And it was not long after that Love Said was born. So we wanted to take a step up from what I was already doing and start reaching out to all stakeholders of romance fraud, including the police, banks, dating apps, social media, who don't like communicating, and trying to put in place a one-stop organisation where victims can come rather than being signposted off all over the place, and get the emotional support as well as other things that they need.
Thank you very much. And Liz?
I'm a criminologist and a forensic linguist, and I look at the language that fraudsters use and then use that to create strategies, communication strategies with the public, but also try and change internal culture around fraud, being defrauded. What is it? Fraud versus scam, trying to change the language around that. And also try and change societal narratives and perceptions around fraud, which you would think would be an impossible task. But actually, in the last few years, we've made huge strides, which is brilliant. We've got some way to go, but we will absolutely get there.
Yeah, absolutely awesome. Excellent. Thank you very much. If I may, Anna, I'd really like to start talking about the in-person side of the romance fraud that you experience, because I think that when people think about romance fraud specifically, everyone sort of assumes that it's only online, because you get to the point where the individual that you're supposed to meet ends up in some sort of horrific accident on the plane over to the UK, and then it all sort of falls apart from there. So is your case quite rare, and because of the in-person nature?
I think it's something that everybody's eyes need opening about, that romance fraud is actually on a huge spectrum. So at one end, we have got catfishing, if you like, where there is no money involved at all. And sometimes it's still, catfishing itself, the definition of that was created by the husband of the woman who was catfishing Nev Schulman. I don't know if you know from MTV Catfish. And it's where somebody creates a fake persona online for the purpose of pursuing a romantic relationship. And the thing is that is the vehicle for a lot of different intents. So we can have, I think the least of the problematic, although it's not okay, is where someone has suffered with self-esteem and they don't think that they can communicate or have a relationship with someone as they are. So they create this persona to do that. Then we've got revenge cases where you might have an ex that has created this persona to get revenge on, and there are legal cases around that, if you like, where revenge porn or intimate image sharing has gone on without consent through that kind of channel. We've also got people that think it's funny and do it for a joke. And then you've got catfishing where it's in person, which was like mine, where it's a very different kind of fraud because it's fraud for personal gain rather than financial gain. And for mine, it was very much that he got a kick, not only just out of the sexual motivation that obviously was there for him, but also the power and control that he had over his victims through the deception. He got an absolute kick out of that game playing that goes on and that control. And then you move into the financial side where these fake profiles are set up for the purpose of sextortion. That can actually also be part of the non-financial as well. So there's a lot of voyeurs or fetishes and kinks that people are playing out using fake profiles online with victims, but that can also, you know, be a financial one as well. So sextortion is really common, and I'd say the youngest of the victims that I have come through there, where they've believed that they've made a connection with someone online. There is that romantic tale, you know, being spun, and then they've either sent images, or we know AI is involved, where they can remove clothes from a picture literally, and then they've been blackmailed for them, and that can end in really tragic results. We know that there have been suicides of teens where that's happened. And then we move into financial romance fraud, where sextortion can also be part of that. And then we move into where there's not just extorting money, but money laundering alongside a whole host of things. The vehicle, the journey is exactly the same for the abuser to get the victim where they need them to be.
And some research that you've done recently, Liz, draws on the similarities between the techniques used in romance frauds, but also and domestic abuse. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is one of the keys to unlocking these misperceptions around fraud and the public misperceptions, but also within organisations as well, and in protect literature that gets it wrong quite a lot of the time, is that fraud is something that's like a theft or akin to somebody leaving their PIN number in their wallet with their cards, whereas actually it's a very sophisticated type of grooming and abuse. And I am very much heartened by the fact that the word grooming is used very often now in relation to fraud, whereas even a year or two ago I'd have eyes raised when I'd say grooming. Well, no, that's like, you know, that's something that happens, you know, it's a child abuse online. And yes, but there are very big similarities, and also in particular with coercive control as well, which obviously there's a law against that was enacted in 2015, but it's still incredibly difficult to prosecute, and the numbers on those, and that's really low. That aside, the societal understandings and sympathy and empathy, and also organisational support around victims of domestic abuse and coercive control are much better. In fact, they are existent in relation rather than non-existent when we're talking about fraud. So yes, some of the main similarities are that the victim feels responsible for the financial, psychological or physical well-being of the fraudster. They feel responsible, and they have this protective response because of that grooming that's gone on, and they feel compelled to secrecy, and they are isolated from friends and family, much like, you know, the traditional domestic abuse scenarios that we're all familiar with and the public's familiar with. And that's another thing that we can harness. The public is familiar with this, so we can use those similarities to try and get these narratives around fraud, which is very much misunderstood, I'd say.
It's making links, isn't it? It's the same as in teaching, in the teaching profession. There's always cross-curricular links that can be made.
Absolutely.
And I think for society to understand it better, they need to be able to make those links with something that they're more familiar with, because it's tangible.
Yeah, it makes sense. Just like when I'm teaching criminology, I teach theory, and you can see the students' eyes glaze over, because, to be honest, on its own, it can be incredibly dry, very pure academic. But then when you start to say, well, actually, let's have a look at risk theories by looking at cases in the newspaper, and look how risk plays out in real life, and how victims are misinterpreted in the media, then their eyes light up and you think, oh, this makes sense. So I think it's the same with fraud. And I think fraud has really suffered from a misunderstanding, I think, in academia as well as the public and organisations, that fraud is like this white collar thing that happens, you know, with these big businesses, not an individual person making what they think to be a good choice. Actually, they're being groomed into making a wrong choice, something that's financially and psychologically harmful to them. So, and I think that's why scams got adopted by the press, because it's something that the public go, oh, this is different from fraud, which is a white collar, big organisational crime. We need to get rid of the word scam anyway, and it is all fraud. It's all fraud. Well, you know, it's like swindle and hoodwink and all those kind of things.
It really minimises something that's happened, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And you think, oh, I've done something wrong, or I've had the wool pulled over my eyes, or something like that. It's like, no, actually, you're a victim of a really horrible crime. And
also with the legal profession, I don't know about you, Liz, but in legislation itself, scam isn't illegal. Scam doesn't exist in our legislation. It is fraud. So if people keep referring to it as a scam, then it can't sit under the legal umbrella, because that is fraud.
Yes, and it's really important, especially when we're teaching, you know, children in schools, the upcoming generations. We teach them the correct names for body anatomy, you know, in order to keep them safe. So if they're going to report something, that they will be able to be accurate. We should also do that with fraud, because fraud is fraud. And I think it's a really pathetic excuse of people in the media saying, well, the public won't understand. It's like, well, if you use it in the right context, people will understand, and you'll stop perpetuating it, you know. So yeah, I mean, that's a massive responsibility. But Anna, you were saying about sextortion, and that's something I've been looking at as well, about sextortion in romance fraud. And if you think about it, it's the perfect vehicle to try and get intimate images and photos from somebody. And this is online romance fraud, but it's the perfect vehicle, because it signals the development of a relationship. And if you don't, then you feel like you're not progressing it, and maybe you know, you're not showing that you're really all in the relationship. And the other person could say that, well, maybe I don't trust you anymore, or you don't want to carry on, or things like that. So there's that human pressure, I think, and it's handled in that context.
100%. And it's part of a long distance relationship, isn't it, when it's moving forward. And the scammers are incredibly clever, the way that they go about asking for those. They obviously, and it's awful, because they harvest intimate images from other victims, and then they use those on victims to coerce them. So they will nearly always offer those up first. And then once they've been sent, the victim will feel pressured to return the favour, if you like. And if they don't want to, that whole guilt tripping language comes into play. Well, obviously, I feel more for you than you do for me. I trust you more than you trust me. All of that kind of language comes into play, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And even saying, oh no, this is the fraudster here saying, oh no, I feel really embarrassed, I've sent you my photos and I feel really exposed because you haven't sent them back. And then they play the victim. So then the victim will feel compelled to protect that fraudster and protect their modesty almost by doing that.
And then to make it worse, it's when it comes to the end, when they've been challenged and they know that the game's up, that's when they throw in. So what's gone from in that journey where they've been groomed, the victim's been groomed, I was groomed for 3 months before I met him, and then we go through the love bombing where you are made to feel like the most important person in that person's life. You know, it's incredibly intense. And then we start that trauma bonding, little bits of trauma bonding in there as well. Well, if you obviously don't care about me, and they pull away, come back, or the trauma bonding of a really awful event. And then come to the end of that, after they've been through all of that roller coaster and the game's up, they've gone from being made to feel like the most important person. And I've got those formats from them with all that building trust, the love poetry. And then they're thrown, bitch, give me money, or your picture's going out to all your friends. And it's the most hateful, intrusive violation of every part of you. And, you know, and that on top of the normal romance fraud is, again, another element of trauma that victims can go through.
And that silencing as well, that another level of perceived shame as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, a lot of the cases of people ending their own lives are to do with that sextortion element. Is one perception of shame too much, and they're trying to hide it, but they can't hide it. That's really important. And also, just like in coercively controlling relationships, that feeling of love doesn't just switch off. Just because you realize this person is not real, or who they say they are, or they're horrible, or despicable human being. You still have that residual endorphins, that feeling of love. It doesn't just switch off, which is why people do go back into relationships, and they start to blame themselves. Is it something that I did wrong? I'll be better. I will behave better. Will you just be back to how you were before? So that's the classic photos and things, just to try and get them back.
Yeah, it really is. And that's part of the whole process as well, isn't it? I mean, the in-person ones we're talking about, Claire, where for these individuals that kind of behaviour comes naturally. So what he did, that process was very, very natural to him. Cecilia's in-person one was very, very natural, and that will be the same to the individuals. This is what comes naturally. And when I saw a therapist after mine, although I'd heard of narcissists and psychopaths, obviously, I had been in a low-level narcissistic relationship with my ex-partner. It was very low level, that undermining of your self-worth and your self-esteem, but over a long period of time. But with him, he was I'd never met anyone like him. She was the one that told me to go and research narcissists and psychopaths, and that was my eye-opener. That was when I started to heal, because I couldn't understand how he had got me to that place where I was. And it was only reading other people's experiences, and they would write what the sort of things that their abuser would say. And again, I was reading those going, my God, it's like almost identical to what has happened to me. The words even are almost identical. And it's just a really well-documented behaviour. And it was when I started getting victims of what was clearly the other kind of romance fraud come to me, that I could see from their messages that there were absolute parallels where they've adopted that whole behaviour. And I have to say that when I ended things with him, because I ended it when I found out he wasn't who he said he was. And then I did a bit of Miss Marpling to find out who he really was. And then I finally met him when I had all the information I needed. You know, they say, pathological liar, you don't go armed not knowing. You go armed with knowing a lot before you ask your questions to see whether they're going to carry on lying. And I knew a lot about him by the time I finished. But that feeling of love hadn't gone. I would never have carried on a relationship with him, and I wouldn't have wanted to, knowing the kind of person that he was. But that feeling of love had not gone. And what worried me more was that it wasn't going. And I still felt that he had some kind of hold over me. And that made me feel a bit crazy. What the hell's the matter with me? Why am I not being able to get him out of... This was before I saw the counsellor. And one of his other victims that came on the tail end of mine, I actually remember being brave enough to say to her, this is going to sound really, really strange, but do you feel like he's still got a hold over you? And she went, absolutely.
Oh, no.
I can't explain how intense that manipulation is to get you in a place where you're theirs.
Yeah.
And you will protect them. Yeah. I was still protecting him for a long while. When I went public with my story, they wanted to put his name out there and I didn't want it. Part of it was to protect his family because I didn't want them to be bombarded. It's a very unusual name. But also I was protecting him.
Yeah.
I didn't know the extent of his behaviours at that point. And now I still wouldn't want his family drawn into it, but he needs to be... something needs to be done now because there are 17 of us that I know of. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. But at the time I was still protecting him. And we know that victims of romance fraud, even the online ones, they will carry on protecting because it's an incredible hold that they have.
And it's interesting what you're saying, Anna, about feeling before you saw the therapist saying, what's wrong with me? And that is very common with victims of these types of fraud, is that self-blame, and it's all engineered for that to be a side effect of it, which will then, like you say, protect the perpetrator moving forward. And I think therapy is the number one thing to do after you've been a victim of fraud, whereas the narratives that we're told is tell your bank, financial, but really the financial loss can be absolutely devastating. You know, seen cases where people have, lost their homes, living on the streets because of it. Psychological harm, I would still say, can meet it or beat it. Absolutely. And it's that there is a fundamental lack, like of a national, support. I have to mention, though, that there is the new government initiative, Stop! Think Fraud, which does start to address this. And the thing it does really well is bringing the fact that it's a partnership effort. No victim is responsibilized directly. It's not an individual's responsibility alone to protect themselves from fraud. No. It's not as if you lock your door. It's not the same. You cannot do this. And I also really like, and I take a little bit of credit for this, is that they don't say follow these 3 steps and you'll be safe, because it will not protect you 100%. And if you become a victim of fraud, then you think, oh, I've done something wrong because the steps were there.
And the blame's back there, isn't it?
Yeah, the blame. Everything there is to try and minimise this blame, put it where it should be, which is the perpetrator. And the fact that victims will take time and will need support to move beyond protecting the perpetrator should be a recognised part of support as well. It should be recognised. And the fact that, if someone stands in front of a police officer and says, this person has done this, but I still love them, that will, for the police, that will dilute the message somewhat. And they might think, well, is it a civil thing rather than this is a criminal offence right in front of me.
Yeah. And we see the same in domestic violence relationships where the victim is still protecting the abusers, don't we?
Yeah.
And there's something really prevalent that came up on one of my feeds somewhere that said, why is it that we're more concerned with women protecting or staying in relationships rather than focusing on the men that are abusing the women? And it's exactly the same in these situations as well. Why is it that organisations and the public are more interested in why people gave their money rather than looking at how the criminal did it?
Oh, 100%. And this is where I started this this journey really a few years ago. It must be, I don't know, about 10 years, I don't know how many years ago. It's like I looked at the research out there and I thought, my gosh, it's all about what is it that the victim's done wrong? Why are they so vulnerable? What is it about them psychologically, cognitively, emotionally, financially that has made them think this is a good idea? And I thought, well, there's no answers here. And it all got pretty close to victim blaming. And I wasn't comfortable with that. So then that's why I started looking at, like, what are these criminals doing? Why are they so persuasive? What is it that they're doing? And
why does it work?
Why does it work? And the answer isn't by looking at the victims, it's by looking at the perpetrators. These are the people that are doing it. And I think that's really important because it moves away from the fact that the misperception that only vulnerable people become a victim of fraud, which is why people don't report. Who wants to be known as vulnerable? you know. But also it gives everybody who isn't technically, legally, or they don't believe they're vulnerable, this full sense of security. Oh, it'll never get me because actually I'm not vulnerable. So that's what the work started to do. And it really, I think, turned it on its head, so much so that it's got a life of its own, which is the best feeling ever.
It's so good, isn't it?
It's really good. And I hear people, saying things and like in meetings, I'm like, yes, this is exactly what we've been pushing for years, and you're coming out with it. This is, really good. I mean, even my mum, a few months ago now, said that she was talking to a local policeman, as parents tend to do, walking out. And she was saying how, he was mentioning the word grooming, because of course she was mentioning me, parents are like, fraud is a type of grooming. And my mum's like, I know where you got that from.
It's just so brilliant though,
isn't it? It's amazing. And it's so good. And the fact that it's proliferating through all these organisations, and not just as, something you say, but actually within the culture of organisations, is really so important, because it's only through a real cultural change that you can start to make a proper difference. My only reservation is that the more the public know and the more that they feel supported, there's going to be more reports, which is great because we want people who are victims to report it. But the powers that be will start to get scared because cases will skyrocket.
They will.
It will only mean that we're getting an accurate picture of fraud. Because latest figures say about 15% of people report fraud. And still it's 41% of all crime.
With 1% of funding.
1% of funding. Imagine if the other 85% of victims report, it's going to look really bad. But we have to really make sure that everyone keeps hold of their heads and goes, good, this means that we're getting a true picture. But there is going to be a really bumpy ride.
And I have to say that since I started doing this, I have, like you, I've seen such a huge change in the culture that's going on. And there's still a long way to go. But with the police, for example, we've been really privileged to be invited to the likes of the City of London's Romance Fraud conference for law enforcement. So there were delegates from all across the country that came, and that kind of thing's really powerful. And when we start getting feedback from those kinds of events where we've reminded police or inspired them to remember that this isn't a victimless crime, it's not just something that's online predominantly, that there are humans attached to that, and that's why they do their job, is because they want to help the humans that are being victimised. And that's something that's really, really brilliant. And it's actually inspiring a lot of forces to do more.
The work we've seen, some of it's been extraordinary, hasn't it? It's been really innovative.
It really is. It really is. And City of London particularly, there is the most incredible, passionate team there. And they are doing what they can to get disseminated all of this good best practice into the forces. And it's working a lot. I know there is stuff being done all over the place now, and we're getting invites to come and do stuff at other police forces as well, which is just brilliant. CIFAS was the same. We had the NCA at CIFAS, and he said to us on a meeting the other day, Nick Sharp, such a lovely guy, that it's really reminded them when they actually see, because they don't get to see those victims' responses. I'm very fortunate that I get to see all those lovely things as well. When they've come out the other side and they start to recognise, they feel confident and empowered into recognising things that have happened, and they come back after they were in such a bad place. And he said it's inspiring to see those kinds of messages, because it means that what we do works. But it is a unique fraud that needs long-term support. And we have got some brilliant organisations out there, but it's very limited and short-term. And we need to have long-term support for victims of this particularly. I have some people come back to me after 2 years and they've just decided now's the time to go onto those dating sites again and try, but they feel nervous quite reasonably about doing that, and it's really important that they've got a safe space to come back to and go, I just wanted to check this out and what big around it. And for me, that's just like a big yay moment, because they're happy to share and keep safe as well.
So
it's lovely.
So how do we make this a more supportive environment for the male victim then? Because I'm sure that there are male victims out there who again don't want to be labelled as such because of this societal view that they have to be the alpha, they have to be the macho kind of person, and so they will not want to be seen as someone who has been groomed in this kind of way. So how is it going to be possible for the societal shift to make sure that it isn't just aimed at the women in this case, but also the men?
To make sure we're putting the right information out there for a start, unlike Vanessa Feltz. Get your facts right and do your research properly when you're looking, is what I say to the media. We tell them, don't we? We make it clear whenever we speak to them that this is, it's a 50-50 split out there. I do get lots of men come to talk to me. I'm very lucky. I purposefully set up, even without knowing, I wanted it to be welcoming, the aesthetic, if you like, wanted it to be welcoming to both men and women. People, when they don't know that I run those pages, I get called bro. Because they don't realise it's me behind it. Right. When I say, it's a 50-year-old woman you're talking to, it's like, what? So it's quite funny. But I do get guys come to talk to me. And actually, the guys, the ones that do come and talk, they're as lovely as everyone else. Romance fraud victims are the nicest people that walk this earth. And it's a real privilege to talk to them. It's not a hardship to talk to lovely people. It's great. But just the same as with male suicides and things, Liz, I don't feel the same. If we can keep pushing that out there, that actually it's okay.
And I think the fact that, we're moving away from traditional protect messaging, which is here's a case study of someone who's 85 years old and it's their first time on the computer, or, something like that. We have to move away from case studies. They're so limiting, and it might be relevant to one person, which is good, but actually it alienates everyone else and leaves them underprotected, overinformed, because there's so much information, but actually nothing that's protecting you. So I think just by carrying on doing what we're doing, which is putting out messages of how do you feel? Does it make your heart race? Do you feel like you've got to act quickly? But just not are they telling you to act quickly? Because often they're not. They're putting it in your mind to act quickly. Do you feel how do you feel when I ask you, can you just tell your mum about this or your brother about this? If you feel a bit icky about it, that's a problem. That is a problem. So think about feelings. Think about how it's feeling in your body. Which
I've got to just read you with you saying that. My disgusting phone with my fingers all over it. Just what you're saying.
Yes.
This Valentine's Day, we started saying this earlier, and I said I really wanted to not put out that list of questions and stuff, because those stories can change. Yes. Just what you're saying. I did have as a start because it's getting more common now about using a reverse search.
Yes.
Because face check ID is incredible.
Yeah.
But I've got, as a dinner, so we've got starter, mains, certain drinks.
Yeah.
Do they want to move you off the app? That is, that's a really big thing. But also with speed is often the sign of a predator or a criminal, because they do that a lot. But then it's about, like what you're saying about what do you feel? Is the connection moving quickly? That immediate soulmate connection should be a cause for concern, but also about getting a friend to talk through with you. And it's that pressure thing, because when you're caught up in a whirlwind, if you feel like you're in a whirlwind, it's very difficult to see clearly out the other side of it, and having someone's eyes in there. So that's what I tried to build into that this year, to put across on our pages as well. It's more about that feeling and understanding what healthy relationships are like.
That's so important. And it's genderless. It's absolutely genderless, so it doesn't exclude any gender,
or age.
Or age. That's the thing. Anybody, or like intellect or anything. Whereas traditional messaging that's hopefully now in the past did, and it was, it was all about, an individual and what might be wrong with them. But actually, especially when we're talking about romance fraud in particular, these feelings, your heart racing, that's actually to be expected in exciting relationships, and they harness that. Like fear and excitement feel very similar in the body. They can be misinterpreted or leveraged or manipulated. People be manipulated into this situation, and this whole kind of romantic idea of being swept off your feet. I mean, it's amazing, the first flush of love and all of that. But if you do feel like you can't tell someone about it, that's massive, because you all shout from the rooftops, about your new love. So that is also really, really important. So I think keeping the messaging about being human rather than being a particular gender.
Okay,
absolutely.
So last of all then, Anna, what can practitioners learn from academics and to do with fraud?
I think for me, as a victim myself, as well as a practitioner, it is so comforting to be able to read and recognise within academic research what you've been through, and it takes away that shame and that blame. So particularly with like Liz's research, you're incredible at making it accessible to everyone. It's not like some academic research where, I mean, I don't consider myself to be over intelligent or not intelligent, but a lot of research can be like word salad. And it's where academics are trying to impress other academics rather than what the research can be best used for. And with yours in particular, I will always send links about your research to victims, because I know they can access it and they will recognise things in it. And it's absolutely brilliant. And that goes across the board, not just with victims, but I send your research out to the police forces as well, and for banks. I come to you and say, what's the best bit for me to send out to this one? Because they're being really so it's vital, because it's got not only for victims where it can comfort victims as far as making them feel less blame towards themselves, because it helps them understand and increases their understanding and awareness and education around it. But like I say, also for those wider stakeholders, it's really important that it educates them on that victim journey. So it's vital, isn't it?
Thank you very much. And the same to you, Liz. So what can academics learn from practitioners in this space?
Oh, loads. And thanks so much, Anna. I work really hard to try and make my work accessible. Mainly, I think, well, for the obvious reasons, but also because I think I'm fairly scarred from my academic journey early on as an undergraduate, not being able to make head nor tail of all these like lofty papers, And I think one of the main things that I've managed to do in recent years is to get pretty much all my work what's known as open access, which means that anyone can access it. You don't have to be an academic in an institution and have a login. And a lot of work is behind paywalls. Not that academics get paid at all. We don't get paid at all for anything that we write. Publishers get all the money, and then universities then have to pay fees for it to be open access. I'm very lucky to be supported at Kingston for them to do that for mine. So yes, making it accessible, but also that dialogue. Because I think in the past, and it's firmly over now, academics and practitioners used to meet in different places, not knowing what each other needed or wanted. And the fact that we get together and we talk about these things in conferences, online, all those kind of things, it's so important. But then also I get asked the question, okay, how can I make this into something that's public facing? Can we work together? And to have that space, both for the practitioners and the academics to be able to have that space, and it's be recognised in each other's organisations as meaningful work rather than a side job. It's really important. So we have a lot to learn, academics, from practitioners, mainly because we're doing the work using all the data, but actually we're not there doing it, visiting victims face to face, seeing the problems in real life. So we're working a lot with the theory behind it. So theory only works with practice. So I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. And I'm afraid that's all we have time for on this episode of Fraudible. I'd like to thank Anna Rowe and Dr. Elisabeth Carter for joining me and today. Thank you, ladies, and I'd also like to thank you for watching or listening and to this episode. My name's Anne-Claire Maillet, and this is Fraudible.